The New York Giants try to avoid yet another 0-2 start to an NFL season on Sunday when they face the Dallas Cowboys. Ed Valentine of Big Blue View here with a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube, and here to help me discuss all things Giants Cowboys is one of my favorite SB Nation people, RJ Ochoa of Blogging the Boys. RJ, thank you so much for a few minutes.
Great to be with you, Ed. Happy Only Murders in the Building Season 5 premiere week to you and yours. It's been a big one for me.
You know, I'm sorry to disappoint you. There's just, you always give me these long, crazy, flowery introductions when I do your show, and I'm just not that good with words. With spoken words, I can't match it. So I wasn't going to try. I wasn't going to go there. But I always, one of my favorite people to talk to, probably my favorite SB Nation person to have on as a guest on a show. So let's see what sort of trouble we can get into here for the next few minutes.
Deal.
All right. So let me just start with this. In my I did a storylines for Giants Cowboys today at Big Blue View on Wednesday, as we record this on Wednesday. One of my 5 things that I mentioned is subheaded something that I think you'll appreciate. I don't know if you've read it or looked at it or whatever. One of my subheads is called Daddy Dallas. Okay. The Dallas Cowboys have now beaten the New York Giants 15 out of the last 16 times that they've played. And I don't know if the other game counts because Dak Prescott didn't play in that one. So the question is, do Dallas Cowboys fans even consider the New York Giants to be a real NFL team at this point?
There are some wins there that Dak did not play. So I think if you're going to count those wins, you have to count the loss that Andy Dalton authored at the end of the 2020 season. I say this with all due respect. I know I tell you this often. When I was growing up, these were the games that you really looked forward to. These were the ones you knew like it's going to be 3.5 to 4 hours of pure stress and intensity. And unfortunately for Giants fans, that disposition has kind of moved towards the Eagles and away from the Giants from the Cowboys perspective. The reality is that this has never really been close. I would say that the closest game I can recall off the top of my head against the Giants or the Cowboys was the 2018 regular season finale when Dallas had already clinched the NFC East and had nothing to play for, actually. And it looked like they were going to lose. But then Dak Prescott pulled off that heroic touchdown throw to Cole Beasley at the very end. And so not only have the Cowboys won all these games, but it's generally been, pretty simple and pretty straightforward. And I do think if there is a sense of pause, it isn't as it relates to the Giants, again, being as respectful as possible. It's just a matter of, man, the coin has landed on heads this many times in a row. At some point, the law of odds works against you and you can't do it again. And so I think people are worried that, the trap door is finally going to open, but until it does, it's kind of hard to believe that it ever will.
I keep waiting for it. And as you know, I've predicted it at least once a year. I always predict the Giants to beat the Cowboys at least once a year, every year, and they always just that always turns out to be a bad idea. But I need to ask you, we're a couple of weeks removed from it now. Have you processed the Micah Parsons trade? Have you gotten over it? When you look at it, do you see any real logic in it? Or are you still just wishing that NFL people like me would stop laughing at the Cowboys?
I do think the dust is settling. I do think that it only and it's understandable, but it only comes up when it's a new topic for someone. Obviously, for you playing the Cowboys first time, it makes sense to check in on it. I think it was a poor decision. I think it was silly and poor strategy to go as long as they did. It's worth reminding people that Micah was first eligible for an extension at the beginning of last offseason, the 2024 offseason, but the Cowboys delayed the Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb extensions by a year, and then all of the 2024 offseason. So they really, prefer to put themselves behind the proverbial eight ball. This particular situation got a little bit more dramatic, and I do think that there are a lot of fans who, over the last 2 weeks now, have painted Micah as an enemy. Some of that is because we've now seen him in another uniform, right? It's easier to kind of, root against him. And the Cowboys are literally rooting against the Packers because they hold their next 2 first-round draft picks. So you want those picks to be as good as possible. It will never be logical. Even if the trade, even if we can get 100% of NFL minds to agree a year, 5 years, 10 years from now that Dallas won the trade, it will never be something that was born of logic. And that is undeniable in my mind. You want to trade Micah Parsons? Fine. I disagree with it, but at least do it logically. And to do it logically would have been to have done it in March of this year, in March of last year. But by trading him 7 days, shout out to Monica Geller or The Ring, a scary movie from the mid 2000s. Trading him 7 days before the season began was quite literally doing it in the most inefficient manner possible. And you hampered your ability to get more draft capital in return for him. And I said it was a different situation, but I said the same thing relative to Dak Prescott a year and a half ago. I would have killed the Cowboys if they had let Dak Prescott walk, the daddy in this conversation, obviously. But if the Cowboys had, amid contract negotiations with Dak, put a date out, pick whatever date you want, June 1st, had said by June 1st, if we don't have a deal, that's it. We just are prepared to live with the consequences. Again, I would have disagreed with that, but at least you are making decisions born of logic. But by paying him on the day the season began last year, you're doing that again in literally the most inefficient manner possible. You can't strike deals at the 59th minute of the 11th hour every single time and call it logic, even if it winds up working out in the end.
Giants fans know this feeling all too well because of what happened with Saquon Barkley a year ago. But have you turned over in your mind what it might feel like if Micah Parsons and the Green Bay Packers win a Super Bowl this coming February?
I want to reiterate this because I think it's important for Giants fans. I have, for a year now, thought that the Saquon thing was overblown. And I told you this, I've told you this on your show. We, for a decade, have killed NFL teams for paying running backs. And when the Giants made a logical decision that happened to not work out well from a narrative standpoint, we just forgot all of that. We just forgot all of it to make jokes at the Giants' expense. And the jokes were funny, the first 500 times, but to act like the Giants were wrong in that situation is silly in my mind. I know that's water under the bridge. I think that's part of what made this particularly disheartening. The Eagles were rumored to be in the mix, and there has been reporting after the fact they made an offer for Micah. And I think it would have been difficult to stomach that, right? The idea of Micah playing for the Eagles. But the Packers broke this franchise. I don't know that this is fully recognized by Giants fans. The wild card loss that Dallas had at the end of the 2023 season when Dallas was the 2 seed, that loss, I mean, the Cowboys are still recovering from that. They have not fully returned to competence or legitimacy since that. And this is a Packers team that has broken them several times. The Dez Cotta game in 2014, 3rd and 20 from Aaron Rodgers to Jared Cook in 2016 when Dak and Zeke were rookies. The incestuous nature of Dallas tying themselves to Green Bay by way of hiring Mike McCarthy to be their head coach and then falling to the Packers in the 23 wildcard round specifically. So it is a little bit unnerving that it's them in general. And maybe there's some of that, with the way Giants fans felt about the Eagles and being division rivals. At this point, the Cowboys have been the center clown of the circus for so long that even if Micah were to be MVP of the game, of the Super Bowl, I feel like, we already live at the eye of the storm, like it's raining more, like we're going to be more wet. That's kind of how I would feel ultimately.
Yeah, I get it. I just know that I thought about this the other day, and I think it's highly unlikely. But the way that Daniel Jones played on Sunday for Indianapolis, what on earth would happen at Big Blue View if Daniel Jones faced Saquon Barkley in a Super Bowl? What?
What if Daniel Jones won that Super Bowl? I
Yeah,
mean,
that what I think I would have to retire.
I
I
think
just do.
to answer that question, and just I guess to cast a question over this season for the Giants, it's it's frustrating. I get it that Saquon won the Super Bowl, but Saquon joined the masters of roster construction in the NFL, right? Like I'm not calling Saquon a bandwagoner by any stretch, and he had a big hand in that, but it wasn't shocking to see the Eagles have success, even with Saquon being a part of it. If Daniel Jones were to resuscitate the moribund Colts, you know what I mean? Like that would be more egg on the proverbial face in my mind, just because. Okay, cool. Saquon made the Eagles a little bit better. That's easy to believe. But it's one thing for Daniel Jones to have success, but I know he did, but if he had joined Kevin O'Connell and had success in that way, okay, fine. It's easy to see that. But to join the Colts, that would be a hard pill to swallow.
You're right, absolutely. Because I mean, John Mara said for how many years, that the Giants had made a lot of mistakes and done a lot of things to screw Daniel Jones up, and I said for years, Daniel Jones may not have ever been, a guy that should have been a top 7, top 8, top 10 NFL quarterback. But I always thought that Daniel Jones had enough ability to be successful in a Ryan Tannehill sort of way when Tannehill was at his best, or an Andy Dalton sort of way when Dalton was in Cincinnati. Um, and I thought that the situation the Giants put him in never allowed that to really happen. So it is definitely to see Daniel Jones do what he did week 1 with Indianapolis and see the Giants go out and score 6 points and lay another week 1 egg was definitely difficult. But we are getting sidetracked here, RJ. We are getting sidetracked. We are we need to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. So I need to ask you a fairly serious question. I mean, when Jerry Jones decided to be done letting Mike McCarthy twist in the wind and move on from McCarthy. By the way, you and I have both now seen that maybe hiring former Green Bay coaches doesn't get you what you really, really want. But he did a very what I see as an un Jerry Jones like thing. He didn't go out and make a splash. He didn't go out and try to convince Nick Saban to come out of retirement. He didn't go and try to bring,
Beyond,
Bill
right.
Bill Jordan Hudson to Dallas.
Right, yeah.
He didn't try to do that. He hired Brian Schottenheimer and it's one of his assistant coaches. Obviously, the Schottenheimer name is a big one, in NFL circles, but he's not a big name, with a big head coaching resume. Um, just when you think about it, how are you still surprised that he went that way? And just your thoughts at this really, really early stage as to how it's working and whether it will work.
I think that the categorization of doing something anti Jerry Jones is part of the way the non-local perspective views the Cowboys. I say that with respect, because I do think there is an assumption that Jerry will do the big thing, he'll do the flashy thing, and occasionally they'll trade for George Pickens, whatever. But this is pretty par for the course. I mean, this is a man who employed Jason Garrett for a decade, right? Like,
Mhm.
far from an exciting, and polarizing figure. People generally, would be free agent X's on the market, and people say like, "Oh, Jerry won't be able to help himself." That's not their mo. Like they're not big swing takers. So in that sense, it wasn't surprising. It was surprising because you referred to letting McCarthy twist in the wind. They let the entire wild card round go without making a decision, which allowed Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn to do all sorts of virtual interviews with the other teams, including the Bears and Jets, who wound up hiring them. They were the hottest names in the cycle, as you recall. And because Dallas waited that whole week and burned it up, they were not even able to virtually interview them. And they spent that first week, the divisional round week, interviewing predictably Kellen Moore and Robert Saleh was a name. Leslie Frazier was a name. It wasn't until after the divisional round that Brian Schottenheimer's name began to circle around. And the only reason it did was because out of nowhere, he was the favorite in betting markets to be the head coach. He hadn't even had an interview with the team at that moment in time. And shortly after he had one, and obviously all the dominoes fell. I would say that the overall offseason went very well for him. He said all of the right things. He really kind of he has a magnetic personality. He's quite charming. He's quite passionate. And so people were, kind of willing to give him a chance and willing to acknowledge that, this man is facing a Kobayashi Maru, which I hope is a reference that you understand. And in the preseason, things got a little bit, tough. The Cowboys didn't exactly look great, and all the philosophies he talked about serving as fundamental values for them, discipline, aggression, tenacity, didn't exactly show up. So, ahead of week one, it was a matter of what exactly is this going to look like? But I would offer that nobody emerged from week one as a bigger winner than Schottenheimer. He managed the circus of what this all has been very well and had this team ready to play football. He managed having his franchise quarterback spit on by the best defensive player on the Eagles as the game began. He called, as the offensive play caller, a very good game, and one that arguably should have been the successful and victorious one, if not for some drops and some poor moments in terms of execution. So I think that people are willing to give him a lot of benefit of the doubt. As an example, specifically, you recall the Cowboys drafted Mozzie Smith in the first round 2 years ago. Well, they've kept him on the roster, and I've said there's no real reason to cutting him at this point. I mean, it's just, you're just trying to prove a point at that point, but he's been a healthy scratch. And Jaden Blue, their fifth round pick this year out of the University of Texas, running back. So many people are anxious to see him, but Brian Schottenheimer and his staff have felt like he's not quite ready. And so these sound like basic things, and I recognize this, but this has not been the Cowboys' way. Schottenheimer has been allowed to kind of have some control and kind of be willing to have players earn trust, earn playing time. And again, these are staples across, functional NFL franchises, but they are very, very, rare commodities relative to the Cowboys specifically. And so he's brought that. And I think that if you asked the collective Cowboys fandom to kind of sign up or sign the things that they have the most faith in right now, I think Brian Schottenheimer's on that list.
I want to ask you about expectations for Dallas. We talked a little bit about the Parsons trade and the fallout. And when I did your show, and by the way, folks, check out the Blogging the Boys channel over on YouTube, because I did do a segment for RJ as well. And you know how I phrased it when we were talking about expectations for Dallas. I said that I thought the Parsons trade, at least for 2025, was sort of freeing because from a national perspective, it sort of lowered expectations. On this season, from a closer perspective than mine, have expectations changed any toward what Dallas fans are expecting and what the team itself is expecting for the 2025 season?
I don't think anybody really has any expectations, and I don't mean to cop out or to ride the fence, but I've said for months now that this is a significant season for the Cowboys relative to the others. In that, if the Cowboys fail to win the Super Bowl or reach the NFC Championship game this year, their drought will officially reach 30 years. Right now we can approximate it and say, you haven't done it in 30 years, but to officially reach that mark is seismic, right? And so I don't think either of us would pick the Cowboys to reach the title game right now. And I think that everyone has kind of accepted that. I mean, I meant to say this to you when we were talking about all the 0-2 starts the Giants have had since 2007. That's a literal generation, right? Like children were born and are now legal adults, in that entire time frame. This is almost double that, right? I mean, and so you're talking about children have been born and not only reached adulthood, but have graduated college and have children of their own and, have 401ks. And so I think that people are just kind of used to it. I mentioned that Green Bay loss that really fractured people, and really, I think if the world ended in 100 years and I had to write a book on the story of the Dallas Cowboys, that would be an important inflection point, because I think at that moment was when, for lack of a better analogy, that was the moment you found out that your parents were the ones putting the Christmas gifts out, right? Like it was a really big kind of wake up call. And maybe they'll stumble into a title game. Maybe they'll stumble into a Super Bowl at some point in the future. But you talked about expectations. They were the 2 seed. They had home field advantage, obviously, up until the title game had they gotten there. They were facing a 7 seed. They had not lost a home game in 16 straight games. They had arguably the MVP at quarterback. They had arguably the best wide receiver in the world in CeeDee Lamb. I mean, they had Micah Parsons. They had no injuries. And so I think to not get it done in such flamboyant fashion with all those things going your way, it makes you afraid to feel anything is possible ever again. And last year was so toxic and so difficult. And last year wasn't even fun for people. So I think now it's just a matter of, hey man, whatever happens. Like I think people are not too afraid to have expectations, but too calloused. And so that has affected some long-term view of the franchise.
All right, I just have a couple more things for you. I want to ask you a Jerry Jones question, and I'm going to preface it this way. I'm a New York Yankees fan, okay? And I grew up.
I know you are. I'm an
I
Astros fan.
grew
We've
up.
been over
I
this.
grew
Yeah.
up. Yes, we've been over this, but I was a kid during the George Steinbrenner days, so I remember, how badly he wanted to win and how he set that expectation of it's a failed season if we don't win a Super Bowl. And Yankee fans now get frustrated by Hal Steinbrenner, George's son, because Hal is much more of a business manager, much more of a successful franchise, and how can we grow the franchise, and how can we make money, and all of how can we build this empire. And if the seats are full, if the team is competitive, if the business of the Yankees is growing, Al Steinbrenner seems to be okay, even if he spends a ton of money, on his roster. You spend money to make money. It feels like Hal Steinbrenner is spending money to make money, not necessarily spending money to win championships. There is an impression of Jerry Jones that he actually will feed into, and I think he actually said something about this recently. There is an impression of Jerry Jones that he cares more about the brand of the Cowboys, more about the Cowboys as an entertainment business than a football business. He cares more about the fact that he wants to see the Cowboys on the news every night. He wants to see the Cowboys in the headlines. He wants to see the radio shows. He wants to hear them talking about the Cowboys. And as long as they're doing that, then there's this impression that he thinks they're successful, that they're more of an entertainment, business than a football business, and that to Jerry, the football part is secondary. Just your take on that whole narrative that I know is out there.
I think it's difficult to counter from an objective standpoint. It's, if this were, you remember back when you learned algebra and you learned how you had to kind of balance the sides of the equation, right? Like it's difficult to balance it. It tilts very much in the direction that you're describing. The quote you're talking about, I mean, ironically, not, and by that I mean not ironic at all, was at the premiere for the Netflix documentary that came out, which, in case I imagine Giants fans had no interest, but it chronicled really Jerry's tenure, but mostly the '90s run that the Cowboys have had, and touched on briefly, the drought that they've been experiencing ever since. So this was at the premiere for a literal documentary series that was meant to celebrate, him and his franchise, and it had a blue carpet, not a red carpet, right? Like so. I mean, that's what I'm saying. If we're doing the math, if we're putting, data points out here, they weigh so much in the opinion that you're offering. I think that Jerry certainly wants to win. I think a lot of people believe he wants to win his way. I think that a lot of people believe he wants to win as long as it doesn't compromise the overall goal. What he said was that if the Cowboys aren't in the news, he'll say something to stir it up. So it wasn't even a matter of I'll say something to boost us. It was a matter of I will stir the pot. And it's difficult, and the take I landed on a few weeks ago in the aftermath of all this and immediately preceding the Micah trade was people love to say, Ed, and I'm sure you've run into this with regards to the Maras or whoever, but people love to say that the Jones boys, talking about Jerry and his son Steven, that they're incompetent and that they're dumb and that they're stupid. And I don't believe that for a singular second. And I don't believe they're bright football minds, but I don't believe they're incompetent because anybody with an internet connection can understand these basic roster building principles. So I mean, we're so far down the rabbit hole that I'm forced to consider that you're doing it for alternative reasons, because all evidence, all logic points to you should get ahead on contract extensions. You should do things this way. You should be active in these ways that you're not. And they're not opposing these things because of reasons. They're opposing them because of some other bottom line. So I find it difficult to push back on that, which is why I think people gravitate towards and connect with personalities like Dak Prescott or Brian Schottenheimer, who seemingly care so much about the on field success for the Cowboys because the highest points of leadership don't necessarily seem to share that disposition.
All right, RJ, I'm going to finish with something a little different. I see behind you, I see a nice bookshelf filled with all sorts of helmets and various NFL things and other things that I assume have some meaning for you. What's your favorite thing that's back there? If you don't mind grabbing it and showing it to us, even what's your favorite thing that's back there, and is there a story behind it?
So it's difficult to grab, but it's this. If I could figure out my orientation, this football.
Okay,
Where I'm
the one
pointing
that's
here.
the one that's right behind your head there. Okay.
Yeah, so I love the Cowboys, and I know you feel this way. I'm so blessed by God to do what I do for a living, and to have made a passion and a love of mine into a profession. That ball I got when I went with my dad to my first ever Cowboys game. My dad's my best friend. I share this with him, and so that just makes it feel again like I'm winning the lottery every day doing all this. We went and saw the Cowboys play the Eagles on Christmas Day in 2006. And at the time, the Cowboys would stay at a Marriott near the airport the night before games, home games, and we stayed there. You know, you could kind of do these packages and whatnot. And the morning of the game, Christmas morning, they would sign autographs in the parking lot on their way out. And so my dad and I went, had this football, was getting it signed by a bunch of people. And Tony Romo, who was in the middle of his first season, having taken over as starter, a move that came at halftime against the Giants on October 23rd, came. So he was the guy, and he was, you know, of Mexican, you know, heritage. I'm Mexican American. I mean, just I was able to, you know, the quarterback of your favorite team at an impressionable age means something to you in a different way. And so, you know, lots of people fighting for this autographs, putting different things and putting whatnot. And Romo is just moving further and further away from me, you know, down the fence line, and I'm just, you know, shrinking with every step. And so he gets in his car and he starts driving off, and I was just devastated. You know, we had the whole game to go to, and my dad pointed at a street light and said, "Hey, look, he's got to go through there. You know, if you run and you catch him, like who knows what happens, whatever." So I tucked my football and ran, you know, about, you know, I don't know, 30 yards, whatever, and beat him to the stoplight, and the light had turned red as he slowed down. And as he slowed down, he rolled down his window and he had a marker in his hand. He signed my football. So Merry Christmas, dude. And that's always been something that has just been meaningful to me. I've been so blessed to do so many cool different things and have moments like that. But given the time, given, you know, my age, and my dad was there, the Christmas magic of it all, that one stands out a little bit more than the others.
Awesome, awesome. I'm actually, I'm glad I asked. I'm glad I
Yeah.
asked. That's quite the story. Anyway, so RJ, thank you so much, you know, for some insight into the Cowboys, and I always enjoy our chats. So thank you very, very much for the time.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Giants fans, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.